Good morning, greetings, subscribers, and other people joining the channel for this episode. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, and I want to welcome you here to Prog Monster. We are now currently doing the series we've been running for July. This is the 8th top album from my 31 albums that introduced me to these bands. And this album, definitely a killer album, Van Halen's Fair Warning, came out in 1981. This was the album, my first Van Halen album I owned. It's not a coincidence that most of the time the first albums that introduce me to a band, if I really like them, end up being my favorite albums by the band, and this is no exception. The last couple of days have been pretty close to the same, although I don't think that Yes Drama album was my favorite of all time, but definitely one of the top albums. So this is Van Halen's Fair Warning. Killer album. This introduced me to the band. In many ways, I think this is their best album. There's no covers on this album. I think it's one of a couple albums. I think only Women and Children First is the same. I think they're the only two without covers on them. Maybe some of the later stuff doesn't as well, but I don't follow the Van Hager era of the band. I only follow the original David Lee Roth and the original band. But this is a killer album. Lots of really killer stuff on it. First of all, I love this album cover. Just so violent. It's such a violent cover. Just depicting the streets of, probably New York. That would be my guess. So this album introduced me to this band. Now, I had heard, a couple of tracks on the radio by them, and that's probably what prompted me when I was in the store to purchase this album. I saw a couple of, there was Ain't Talking About Love and Running with the Devil were songs I had heard on the radio. So when I went there, I had gone with the intent of getting that Van Halen album, but I saw this one on the shelf being brand new out on the new rack shelf, and I thought, you know what, let's go for a new album instead. So I bought this one, Fair Warning, and I've never been disappointed at all. This is the absolute fantastic album, produced by Ted Templeton, another great album by him. This one has arguably the best Van Halen songs on it. Many people cite it. There's a couple songs on this album they really cite as being among Van Halen's best, Mean Street and Unchained being the two that I'm thinking of. Not necessarily my favorite songs on the album, but definitely up there in the top five, both of them. Mean Street has that killer, heavy guitar riff to it. Very different than a lot of their other poppy stuff, but really actually a killer song. Dirty Movies, another really absolutely underrated killer track here. Sinner Swing, this one's more up-tempoed, heavier, just really fast-paced, but definitely another cracking song here, underrated song, I think. Hear About It Later was one of the radio songs here. A good radio song, I think, one of the better ones of the ones on the album. There's like 4 or 5 of them on this album that got a lot of airplay. Then you flip to the other side, you get Unchained, which is one of the absolute killer classic guitar riffs of all time. People love to use this for their opening at their weddings. It's just absolutely a killer track. I think David Lee Roth's at his best on this track. Push Comes to Shove, probably my favorite track over the history of this album. Not as much anymore. It's kind of worn out with me a little bit, but still great. So This Is Love, another radio track that I really don't listen to much. And then you got the two kind of shorter but not as prominent songs, the two Weak Sisters, maybe throw-ons here, Sunday Afternoon in the Park and One Foot Out the Door. One Foot Out the Door I like a little better. It's a little catchy, has that Van Halen riffing to it. Yeah, this is a killer album. Album cover, of course, is iconic. And then you got a lot of absolute killer guitar stuff on here by the late Eddie Van Halen or Edward Van Halen, depending on who you want to talk to. But I've always been a David Lee Roth fan. I still am. I think this was his best vocal performance of any of the albums, and he had some fantastic stuff on those earlier albums too. But for me personally, I think this is his best. And it really brought the band to the forefront for me, putting them in my top 5 at the time. And they sustained that for a few years before they kind of started to slide. So unfortunately, Diver Down was next, and it slid down a bit, but I still liked it a lot. But then after that, the 1984 album, I didn't really follow them too much. Although now I have the 1984 album, I'm giving it a lot more credit than I did back then. Absolutely killer album. So those first 6 Van Halen albums, really strong. Very few bands have put out so many strong albums in a row, I think. So absolutely killer. Van Halen is my number 8 of my 31 favorite, or my 31 albums that introduced me to these bands, introducing me to Van Halen, no doubt. So if you like this video, please hit the like and subscribe. Make any comments about Van Halen or the album, you can do that in the comment section. Or if you want to talk about the list in general or make your own list, you can do that. All of that's acceptable. I'm good with it. I like seeing all that stuff. And don't forget to hit the notification bell. And from Prog Monster, I want to wish you a very good evening. Take care, and we will see you again tomorrow with another episode. So take care and goodbye.